The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Edwards Air Force Base as Captain Sarah Mitchell walked toward the briefing room. Her flight suit was crisp, her boots polished to perfection, and her auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun. At 28, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled test pilots in the United States Air Force, but today would test her abilities like never before. The year was 1967, and the Cold War was at its peak. The space race between America and Russia had captured the world's attention, but behind the scenes, both nations were developing aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible. The F-12 Blackbird was one such machine, a sleek black interceptor capable of speeds exceeding Mach 3, flying at altitudes where the sky turned dark even in daylight. Sarah had been assigned to the F-12 test program 6 months earlier, much to the surprise of many at Edwards. Female pilots were rare enough in the regular Air Force, but in the exclusive world of experimental test flying, she was practically a unicorn. The other pilots respected her skills, but some of the older brass remained skeptical about women in such demanding roles. Admiral James Richardson was one of those skeptics. A decorated Navy officer with 30 years of service, he had been assigned to oversee the joint military evaluation of the F-12 program. Richardson was a man of the old school, tall, stern, with steel-gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through people. He had commanded aircraft carriers in the Pacific and had little patience for what he considered experimental social engineering in the military. During the morning briefing, Richardson made his position clear. The room was filled with pilots, engineers, and military officials, all focused on the day's test schedule. Sarah sat in the third row, listening intently as the chief test pilot outlined the objectives for the high-altitude reconnaissance mission planned for that afternoon. "The F-12 will be pushed to its operational ceiling today," explained Colonel Barnes, pointing to charts showing altitude and speed parameters. "We need to verify the aircraft's performance at 85,000 feet, while maintaining Mach 3.2. The pilot will need to demonstrate precise control during high-speed turns and evaluate the effectiveness of the new radar system." Admiral Richardson stood up, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Colonel Barnes, I have some concerns about today's mission profile," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command. "The parameters you've outlined are extremely demanding, even for our most experienced pilots." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on Sarah. "I understand that Captain Mitchell has been assigned to this mission. While I'm sure she's a competent pilot, I question whether this particular flight is appropriate for someone with her limited experience in high-performance aircraft." The room fell silent. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in the briefing room. But she kept her expression neutral. She had faced this kind of doubt before and had learned that the best response was always through action, not words. Colonel Barnes shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, Captain Mitchell has successfully completed 12 F-12 test flights, including several at extreme altitudes. Her performance has been exemplary." Richardson smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. "I'm sure it has been, Colonel. But today's mission involves flying higher and faster than any previous test. The F-12 is not a forgiving aircraft. At those altitudes, the margin for error becomes practically non-existent. The pilot will be wearing a pressure suit, operating in an environment more like space than the atmosphere we're used to." He turned to face Sarah directly. "Captain Mitchell, I'm sure you understand that this isn't personal. It's simply a matter of selecting the pilot most qualified for such a demanding mission. Perhaps you could observe from the control room and gain valuable experience for future assignments." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah knew that backing down now would confirm every doubt about her abilities and potentially derail her career in test flying. She also knew that Admiral Richardson's concerns, while condescending in delivery, weren't entirely without merit. The F-12 was indeed an unforgiving machine, and today's mission would push both aircraft and pilot to their absolute limits. She stood up slowly, her voice steady and professional. "Admiral Richardson, I appreciate your concern for mission safety. However, I've been preparing for this specific flight profile for 3 weeks. I've completed extensive simulator training, high-altitude physiology preparation, and pressure suit certification. I'm fully qualified and ready to execute this mission." Richardson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Confidence is admirable, Captain, but the F-12 isn't like the training aircraft you're accustomed to. When you're flying at 3 times the speed of sound, 80,000 feet above the Earth, there's no room for feminine intuition or emotional decision-making. This requires ice-cold calculation and split-second reactions based on years of experience." The comment about feminine intuition brought a flush of anger to Sarah's cheeks, but she maintained her composure. Several pilots in the room shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the inappropriateness of Richardson's remark. "Sir, my flying record speaks for itself," Sarah replied firmly. "I've never failed to complete a mission, never exceeded operational parameters, and never compromised safety protocols. My gender has no bearing on my ability to fly this aircraft." Richardson chuckled, a sound that carried no humor. "Captain, I've been flying military aircraft since before you were born. I've seen what happens when pilots get in over their heads, especially in experimental programs like this one. The F-12 has already killed 2 test pilots, both highly experienced men with thousands of flight hours." He walked closer to where Sarah stood, his presence imposing. "When you're pulling 6 Gs in a vertical climb, when your pressure suit is the only thing keeping your blood from boiling, when you're flying faster than a rifle bullet, that's when experience matters. That's when the difference between a good pilot and a great pilot becomes a matter of life and death." The tension in the room was palpable. Other pilots watched the exchange with keen interest, knowing that Sarah's response would likely determine not just today's mission assignment, but possibly the future of women in experimental test programs. Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Admiral, I understand the risks involved in today's mission. I also understand that you have concerns about my qualifications. But I would respectfully suggest that judging a pilot's abilities based on assumptions rather than performance is not in the best interest of this program or military aviation in general." She paused, looking directly into Richardson's stern eyes. "If you have specific concerns about my technical qualifications, flight experience, or mission preparation, I'm happy to address them. But if your concerns are based solely on the fact that I'm a woman, then I believe you're doing a disservice to the Air Force's commitment to putting the best qualified pilot in every cockpit." Richardson's expression hardened. "Captain Mitchell, are you suggesting that I'm allowing personal bias to influence my professional judgment?" "I'm suggesting, sir, that every pilot in this room should be evaluated on their merits, their training, and their proven abilities," Sarah replied calmly. "Nothing more, nothing less." The Admiral was silent for a long moment, studying Sarah's face. Finally, he turned to address the entire room. "Very well. Captain Mitchell, you want to prove yourself in the F-12? I'll give you that opportunity." He moved to the front of the briefing room, his voice taking on a formal tone. "I'm modifying today's mission profile. Instead of the standard high-altitude reconnaissance flight, Captain Mitchell will demonstrate the F-12's intercept capabilities. She'll take the aircraft to maximum operational altitude and speed, then execute a simulated intercept of a high-speed target." A murmur ran through the room. Several pilots exchanged glances, recognizing that Richardson had just significantly increased the difficulty and danger of the planned mission. Colonel Barnes looked concerned. "Admiral, that's a much more demanding flight profile. Perhaps we should—" Richardson held up a hand, silencing the colonel. "Captain Mitchell seems confident in her abilities. I'm simply providing her with an opportunity to demonstrate them fully." He smiled that cold smile again. After all, If she's going to fly the most advanced interceptor in the world, she should prove she can use it for its intended purpose. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her expression steady. She knew she was being tested, perhaps even set up for failure. The intercept mission would require her to push the F-12 to its absolute limits while executing complex, tactical maneuvers. It was exactly the kind of flight that separated exceptional pilots from merely good ones. "I accept the modified mission profile, sir," she said without hesitation. Richardson nodded slowly. "Excellent. The mission will launch at 1400 hours. You'll have 3 hours to complete final preparations." He gathered his papers and headed toward the door, pausing to look back at Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, I hope you understand what you've gotten yourself into. The F-12 doesn't forgive mistakes, and today's mission will test every skill you possess. I sincerely hope your confidence is justified." As the Admiral left the briefing room, Sarah remained standing, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. She had 3 hours to prepare for the most challenging flight of her career, knowing that failure would not only end her involvement in the F-12 program, but likely destroy her credibility as a test pilot entirely. The other pilots began filing out of the room, some offering words of encouragement, others simply nodding respectfully. Sarah gathered her materials and headed toward the door, her mind already focused on the preparations ahead. Colonel Barnes approached her as she reached the exit. "Sarah, you don't have to do this. Richardson was out of line with some of his comments and I can reassign the mission." She shook her head firmly. "No, sir. This is exactly the kind of opportunity I've been working toward. I'm not going to back down now because someone thinks I can't handle it." The colonel studied her face, seeing the determination there. "All right, but remember, the F-12 is unforgiving. Everything has to be perfect, especially at the performance levels Richardson is demanding." "It will be, sir," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. As she walked across the tarmac toward the flight preparation building, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She had trained for months to fly the F-12, but today's mission would push both her and the aircraft into uncharted territory. The modified intercept profile would require split-second timing, perfect coordination, and nerves of steel. The F-12 Blackbird sat on the ramp like a sleeping predator, its black titanium skin gleaming in the afternoon sun. At over 100 feet long, it was more missile than airplane, designed to fly faster and higher than anything else in the sky. Just looking at it reminded Sarah of the enormous responsibility she carried, not just for herself, but for every woman who might follow in her footsteps. She thought about Admiral Richardson's words, particularly his comment about feminine intuition and emotional decision-making. Throughout her career, she had encountered men who believed that women were inherently unsuited for high-stress, high-performance roles. Some were openly hostile, others merely skeptical, but all seemed to share the assumption that gender determined capability. Today, she would have the chance to prove them wrong, or, if she failed, to reinforce every stereotype and prejudice that had been voiced in that briefing room. Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the preparation building, ready to begin the most important 3 hours of her life. The pressure suit was like wearing a personal spacecraft. Sarah stood in the equipment room as 2 technicians helped her into the specialized gear that would keep her alive at altitudes where unprotected human blood would boil in seconds. The suit was bulky and restrictive, but it was also her lifeline for the mission ahead. "Check your oxygen flow, Captain," said Technical Sergeant Williams, a veteran of the test pilot program who had suited up dozens of pilots for high-altitude missions. "Remember, above 60,000 feet, you're essentially in space. The suit's your only protection." Sarah nodded, testing the helmet's communication system and verifying that all connections were secure. The pre-flight checklist for an F-12 mission was extensive, covering everything from life support systems to navigation equipment. Every detail had to be perfect because there would be no opportunity for corrections once she was airborne. Through the small window of the preparation room, she could see Admiral Richardson standing near the control tower, talking with several other officers. Even from a distance, his body language conveyed skepticism and authority. Sarah knew he was probably outlining his expectations for the mission, perhaps even placing bets on whether she would successfully complete the challenging intercept profile he had demanded. "Captain Mitchell, we've received the final mission parameters," announced Major Harrison, the mission coordinator. He handed her a sealed envelope containing the specific details of the intercept scenario. "Your target will be a modified T-38 flying at maximum altitude and speed. You'll need to demonstrate successful intercept capability while maintaining all safety protocols." Sarah studied the mission briefing carefully. The target aircraft would be flying at approximately 50,000 feet at near supersonic speeds, while she would be approaching from 80,000 feet at more than 3 times the speed of sound. The intercept would require precise calculations, perfect timing, and flawless execution of high-speed maneuvers that pushed both pilot and aircraft to their absolute limits. "The target will be launched 30 minutes after your takeoff," Major Harrison continued. "You'll have approximately 15 minutes to locate, track, and execute a simulated intercept. The entire sequence will be monitored by ground radar and recorded for analysis." As Sarah completed her final preparations, she found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in rural Montana, she had always been fascinated by aviation. Her father, a crop duster, had taught her to fly before she could legally drive a car. She had excelled in mathematics and physics in high school, earning a scholarship to study aeronautical engineering in college. The Air Force had recruited her straight out of university, recognizing her combination of technical knowledge and natural flying ability. She had progressed rapidly through flight training, consistently ranking at the top of her classes despite facing skepticism and occasional hostility from instructors and fellow pilots who questioned whether women belonged in military aviation. The test pilot program had been the culmination of years of preparation and dedication. Only the most skilled pilots were selected for experimental aircraft programs, and Sarah had beaten out dozens of highly qualified candidates for her position. But today's mission felt different from anything she had faced before. It wasn't just about flying an experimental aircraft. It was about proving that gender had no bearing on a pilot's ability to handle the most demanding challenges in military aviation. "Captain, it's time," announced Sergeant Williams, checking his watch. "The F-12 is ready for your final inspection." Sarah walked across the tarmac toward the waiting aircraft, her footsteps echoing in the pressure suit's boots. The F-12 looked even more imposing up close, a sleek black arrow designed to slice through the atmosphere at speeds that seemed impossible. The aircraft's titanium skin was warm to the touch from sitting in the desert sun, but Sarah knew that within an hour it would be subjected to temperatures exceeding 500 degrees Fahrenheit from air friction at high speed. The pre-flight inspection was methodical and thorough. Sarah checked every system, every connection, every potential point of failure. The F-12 was a complex machine with thousands of components, any one of which could cause catastrophic failure if not functioning properly. She examined the engines, the fuel systems, the control surfaces, and the ejection seat that would be her last resort if something went catastrophically wrong. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the crew chief, approached with the final sign-off paperwork. "She's ready to fly, Captain. All systems are green, fuel is topped off, and we've double-checked everything on the maintenance list." "Any concerns I should know about?" Sarah asked, trusting the experienced crew chief's judgment. "None whatsoever. This particular aircraft has been rock-solid reliable. Just remember to keep an eye on your engine temperatures during the high-speed portions of the flight. The F-12 runs hot, especially when you're pushing maximum performance." Sarah climbed the ladder to the cockpit, settling into the ejection seat and beginning the startup sequence. The cockpit was cramped but efficiently designed, with every instrument and control positioned for maximum accessibility during high-stress flight operations. She had spent hundreds of hours in F-12 simulators, but the real aircraft always felt different, more responsive, more alive, more dangerous. The engine startup sequence was a carefully choreographed procedure that took several minutes to complete. As the massive engines spooled up, Sarah could feel their power vibrating through the airframe. The F-12's engines were unlike anything else in aviation, designed to operate efficiently at speeds and altitudes that would destroy conventional aircraft. Edwards Control. This is Blackbird 1 requesting clearance for departure. Sarah called over the radio, her voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Blackbird 1, you are cleared for departure. Winds are calm, visibility unlimited. Contact departure control on frequency 285.7 after takeoff. Admiral Richardson's voice came over a separate radio channel reserved for mission coordination. Captain Mitchell, this is Admiral Richardson. I'll be monitoring your flight from the control room. Remember, we need to see flawless execution of the intercept profile. Any deviations from planned parameters or safety protocols will result in mission termination. Understood, Admiral. Blackbird 1 is ready for departure. Sarah advanced the throttles, feeling the F-12 surge forward with incredible acceleration. Even on the ground, the aircraft felt eager to fly, straining against the brakes like a racehorse at the starting gate. She released the brakes, and the F-12 shot down the runway, lifting off after only a few thousand feet despite its size and weight. The initial climb was steep and rapid. Within minutes, Sarah had reached 30,000 feet and was still climbing at an angle that would have been impossible in any conventional aircraft. The F-12's performance was breathtaking. The altimeter spun upward as the aircraft climbed toward the edge of space. At 50,000 feet, Sarah engaged the afterburners and felt the aircraft surge forward with a burst of acceleration that pressed her back into the ejection seat. The speed built rapidly, Mach 1, Mach 2, Mach 2.5, through the cockpit windows. She could see the sky beginning to darken as she climbed beyond the bulk of the atmosphere. Edwards Control, Blackbird 1 passing through 60,000 feet, speed Mach 2.8 and climbing, Sarah reported, monitoring the numerous instruments that track the aircraft's vital signs. Copy, Blackbird 1. You're looking good on all parameters. Target aircraft will be launched in 15 minutes. At 75,000 feet, Sarah leveled off temporarily to verify all systems before beginning the intercept profile. The view from the cockpit was spectacular. The curvature of the Earth was clearly visible, and the sky above had turned the deep blue-black of space. Below, the California desert stretched to the horizon in every direction, looking like a detailed map rather than the actual landscape. The F-12's performance at this altitude was extraordinary. Despite being 15 miles above sea level, the aircraft felt stable and responsive. The engines continued to operate smoothly, and all flight control systems functioned normally. Sarah felt a surge of confidence as she prepared for the intercept sequence. Blackbird 1, target aircraft is airborne and climbing. You should have radar contact in approximately 10 minutes, reported the mission controller. Sarah activated the F-12's sophisticated radar system, scanning the airspace below for the target aircraft. The radar display showed her own position at the top of the screen, with range rings extending downward to track potential targets. At this altitude and speed, she had an enormous tactical advantage. She could see everything for hundreds of miles in any direction while being virtually invisible to aircraft flying at conventional altitudes. Contact, she announced as a blip appeared on the radar screen. Target bearing 270, range 80 miles, altitude approximately 50,000 feet. The intercept geometry was complex, requiring Sarah to calculate the precise timing and approach angle needed to close with a high-speed target while maintaining the F-12's supersonic flight profile. She adjusted her heading slightly and pushed the throttles forward, accelerating to Mach 3.2, more than 2,100 miles per hour. At these speeds, the margin for error was essentially zero. Any mistake in calculation or execution could result in missing the target entirely, or worse, a mid-air collision that would destroy both aircraft. Sarah's hands moved smoothly across the controls, making minute adjustments to heading and altitude while monitoring the closure rate displayed on her radar. Admiral Richardson's voice crackled over the radio. "Captain Mitchell, you're approaching maximum intercept speed. Remember, you need to demonstrate controlled flight throughout the entire sequence." Sarah was too focused to respond immediately. The target aircraft was now clearly visible on her radar, climbing toward its maximum altitude while she approached from above and behind at nearly 3 times its speed. The closing velocity was tremendous. The distance between the two aircraft was decreasing by more than a mile every second. "Intercept in 30 seconds, she announced. Her voice steady despite the intense concentration required to maintain control of the F-12 at maximum performance. The aircraft was flying faster than any pilot had ever flown before, at an altitude where the atmosphere was so thin that conventional flight would be impossible. Through the cockpit canopy, Sarah could see the target aircraft far below, a tiny speck against the brown landscape of the desert. She adjusted her approach angle slightly, ensuring that her simulated intercept would pass safely to one side of the target while demonstrating her ability to achieve a firing solution. 10 seconds to intercept, she called, watching the radar display as the two aircraft converged. At the precise moment, she pulled back slightly on the control stick, executing a smooth climb that carried the F-12 directly over the target aircraft with perfect timing and spacing. "Intercept complete," Sarah announced, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Target acquired and tracked successfully." But the mission wasn't over yet. Admiral Richardson had demanded a full demonstration of the F-12's capabilities, and Sarah knew that simply completing the intercept wouldn't be enough to satisfy his skepticism. She needed to show that she could maintain control of the aircraft throughout a complete flight profile that included high-speed maneuvering, maximum altitude operations, and precise navigation. "Blackbird 1, execute a 360-degree turn at current altitude and speed," came Richardson's voice over the radio. "Let's see how well you handle the aircraft in a sustained turn at maximum performance." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. A 360-degree turn at Mach 3 plus and 80,000 feet was an extremely demanding maneuver that would test both her skills and the F-12's structural limits. The forces involved would be enormous, and any loss of control could be catastrophic. She banked the aircraft slowly to the left, feeling the G-forces build as the F-12 entered the turn. At this speed, even a gentle turn generated tremendous stress on both the aircraft and the pilot. Sarah's pressure suit inflated automatically to help her maintain consciousness as the centrifugal forces tried to drain blood from her brain. The turn seemed to take forever, though in reality it lasted only a few minutes. Sarah maintained perfect control throughout the maneuver, keeping the aircraft's speed and altitude constant while executing a complete circle high above the desert. When she rolled back to level flight, she was exactly on her original heading, demonstrating precision that would have been impressive in any aircraft and was extraordinary in the F-12. "Turn complete," she reported, her breathing slightly labored from the physical stress of the maneuver. "All systems nominal, maintaining altitude and speed." In the control room far below, Admiral Richardson watched the radar display with growing amazement. The blip representing Sarah's aircraft had just completed a perfect circle at an altitude and speed that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Every parameter was exactly as specified, with no deviations from the planned flight profile. Admiral Richardson stood motionless in the control room, his eyes fixed on the radar display that showed Sarah's aircraft as a bright blip moving across the screen at impossible speeds. Around him, technicians and engineers monitored dozens of instruments that tracked every aspect of the F-12's performance, but Richardson's attention was focused entirely on the radio communications between the pilot and ground control. "Blackbird 1, begin descent to 40,000 feet for final approach," instructed the mission controller. Maintain current speed until passing through 60,000 feet, then begin gradual deceleration. Sarah's voice came through the speakers with remarkable composure. Copy. Beginning descent. Speed Mach 3.2. All systems green. What Richardson was witnessing defied his expectations completely. Throughout his 30-year military career, he had observed hundreds of test flights and combat missions. He had seen experienced pilots struggle with far less demanding aircraft under much more forgiving conditions. Yet Captain Mitchell was not just surviving the most challenging flight profile in military aviation. She was excelling at it. The descent phase of an F-12 mission was in many ways more difficult than the climb. The aircraft had to be gradually slowed from more than 3 times the speed of sound, while maintaining precise control and avoiding dangerous oscillations that could tear the aircraft apart. The process required delicate touch and perfect timing, skills that typically took years to develop. Passing through 70,000 feet, speed Mach 2.8, Sarah reported. Beginning gradual power reduction. Colonel Barnes, standing beside Richardson, shook his head in amazement. I've never seen anyone handle the F-12 with that level of precision on such a demanding mission profile. Her control inputs are absolutely perfect. Richardson said nothing, but his expression had changed from skeptical confidence to something approaching concern. He had designed this mission profile specifically to push Captain Mitchell beyond her limits, expecting her to make the kind of mistakes that would justify his doubts about women in experimental test programs. Instead, he was watching a demonstration of piloting skill that exceeded anything he had seen in decades of military aviation. The F-12 continued its descent, with Sarah maintaining perfect control throughout the complex process of slowing from supersonic to subsonic speeds while descending through multiple layers of atmosphere. Each altitude required different techniques and adjustments, and the margin for error decreased as the aircraft's speed and the air density changed. Blackbird 1, you're cleared for approach to runway 27, announced the tower controller. Winds are light and variable, visibility unlimited. You're number 1 for landing. Copy, tower. Blackbird 1 on final approach. Through the control room's windows, Richardson could see the F-12 approaching the runway, its black silhouette unmistakable against the desert sky. The aircraft looked impossibly fast even in its landing configuration, touching down with the characteristic long rollout required by its high approach speed. As the aircraft taxied toward the ramp, Richardson felt something he hadn't experienced in many years, genuine uncertainty about his own judgment. Everything he thought he knew about pilot selection and the limitations of women in combat roles had just been challenged by a flight demonstration that was flawless in every respect. Sarah shut down the engines and completed the post-flight checklist with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the mission. When she finally climbed down from the cockpit, removing her helmet to reveal hair damp with perspiration, but a face showing quiet satisfaction, Richardson knew that something fundamental had changed. The debriefing session was held in the same conference room where the day had begun with Richardson's skeptical challenge. This time, however, the atmosphere was completely different. The flight data showed performance parameters that exceeded the most optimistic projections, with no deviations from planned procedures and no safety violations of any kind. Captain Mitchell's flight was exceptional by any standard, reported the chief flight engineer, reviewing telemetry data from the aircraft's sensors. She maintained precise control throughout the entire mission profile, including the high-speed intercept and the sustained turn at maximum altitude. Engine temperatures remained within normal limits, and all structural loads were well below maximum allowable values. Major Harrison added his assessment of the tactical aspects of the mission. The intercept sequence was executed with textbook precision. Target acquisition, tracking, and simulated engagement all occurred exactly as planned. Captain Mitchell demonstrated complete mastery of the F-12's radar and navigation systems. Richardson listened to the technical assessments without comment, but internally, He was grappling with the implications of what he had witnessed. His preconceptions about women in high-performance military roles had been based on assumptions rather than evidence, and today's mission had provided evidence that contradicted everything he had believed. When the formal debriefing concluded, Richardson asked to speak with Sarah privately. The other attendees filed out of the conference room, leaving the Admiral and the captain alone. Richardson stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at the F-12 that still sat on the ramp, its titanium skin cooling from the heat generated during the high-speed flight. "Captain Mitchell," he began, his voice lacking the authoritative tone it had carried that morning, "I owe you an apology." Sarah looked surprised. Throughout her career, she had encountered many skeptics, but few had ever admitted their mistakes so directly. Richardson continued, still facing the window. "When I questioned your assignment to today's mission, I thought I was exercising appropriate caution based on experience and judgment. I realize now that my concerns were based on prejudice rather than professional assessment." He turned to face her. And Sarah could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Respect, perhaps even admiration. "What you accomplished today was remarkable, not just for a woman pilot, but for any pilot. I've been involved in experimental aircraft programs for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone handle a first intercept mission with that level of skill and composure." Sarah felt a mixture of validation and relief. The day had been physically and emotionally exhausting, not just because of the demanding flight profile, but because she had been flying under the weight of representing all women in military aviation. "Thank you, Admiral. That means a great deal coming from someone with your experience," she replied. Richardson shook his head. "I should be thanking you. You've taught me something important today about the danger of letting assumptions override evidence." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "I pride myself on being a professional military officer, but my behavior this morning was neither professional nor fair to you or to the Air Force." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the conference room door. Colonel Barnes entered with a folder of papers and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Admiral Captain Mitchell, I thought you should see these preliminary performance numbers," he said, spreading several charts on the conference table. "The F-12's performance during today's mission exceeded all previous test results. We achieved sustained flight at higher speeds and altitudes than any previous test, with better fuel efficiency and lower engine stress than we thought possible." Richardson studied the charts with growing amazement. "These numbers suggest that our previous assessments of the F-12's capabilities were too conservative." "That's exactly right," Barnes confirmed. "Captain Mitchell's flying technique allowed us to explore the aircraft's full potential for the first time. Her control inputs were so smooth and precise that the aircraft was able to maintain optimal performance throughout the entire mission profile." Sarah looked at the data with professional interest, but she was more focused on the broader implications of the day's events. "Sir, does this mean the F-12 program will continue?" Richardson considered the question carefully. "Based on today's results, I'll be recommending to the Pentagon that we accelerate the F-12 development timeline. This aircraft represents a significant advancement in our defensive capabilities, and we now have proof that it can be operated safely and effectively under the most demanding conditions." He looked directly at Sarah. "I'll also be recommending that Captain Mitchell be assigned as the primary test pilot for the advanced phases of the program." The room fell silent as the significance of Richardson's statement sank in. Assignment as primary test pilot for an advanced experimental program was one of the most prestigious positions in military aviation, typically reserved for the most experienced and respected pilots in the service. "Admiral, are you certain about that recommendation?" Barnes asked, not questioning Sarah's qualifications, but recognizing the potential controversy such an assignment might generate. Richardson's answer came without hesitation. "Colonel, I've just witnessed the most impressive display of piloting skill in my 30 years of military service. Captain Mitchell has proven that she can handle the most demanding aircraft in our inventory under the most challenging conditions. I can't think of anyone more qualified to lead this program forward. Sarah felt a surge of emotions, pride, gratitude, and a deep sense of responsibility for the opportunity she was being offered. "Admiral, I won't let you down." Richardson smiled, and this time the expression was warm and genuine. "Captain, after what I witnessed today, I have no doubt about that whatsoever." As the meeting concluded and the participants began to disperse, Richardson remained behind for a moment, still processing the events of the day. His entire worldview about women in military aviation had been shattered and rebuilt in the space of a few hours. The fear he had felt while watching Sarah's aircraft disappear into the stratosphere had not been fear for her safety. It had been fear that his own prejudices might cost the Air Force one of its most talented pilots. Walking across the tarmac toward his staff car, Richardson reflected on the lesson he had learned. Military effectiveness depended on identifying and utilizing the best available talent, regardless of gender or any other irrelevant characteristic. Captain Mitchell had not just proven her individual capabilities. She had demonstrated that the military's future success would depend on embracing merit-based selection rather than clinging to outdated assumptions. The F-12 program would continue, with Sarah as its primary test pilot. But more importantly, Richardson knew that his report would likely influence policies throughout the military, potentially opening doors for other qualified women who had been excluded based on prejudice rather than capability. That evening, as Sarah completed her final paperwork for the day, she received a message that Admiral Richardson wanted to see her once more before he returned to Washington. She found him in his temporary office, reviewing flight reports and preparing recommendations for his superiors. "Captain, I wanted to speak with you one more time before I leave Edwards," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Today changed more than just your career trajectory. It changed mine as well." Sarah listened as Richardson explained how he planned to use his influence to advocate for expanded opportunities for women throughout the military aviation community. He spoke of policy changes, training program modifications, and cultural shifts that would be necessary to ensure that talent was recognized regardless of gender. "You've given me the evidence I need to make a convincing case," he said. "But more than that, you've shown me that leadership requires the courage to admit when we're wrong and the wisdom to change course when presented with new information." As Sarah left the Admiral's office that evening, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of a successful mission, but the knowledge that her performance had implications far beyond her individual career. She had proven that women could excel in the most demanding roles in military aviation, and she had converted one of the military's most influential skeptics into an advocate for change. The F-12 program would continue to push the boundaries of aviation technology, with Sarah leading the way as its primary test pilot. But the day's most important achievement was the demonstration that merit, not gender, should determine who gets the opportunity to serve in the most challenging and important roles in the military. Admiral Richardson's fear had not been paralyzed by Sarah's failure. It had been paralyzed by the realization of how wrong he had been about her capabilities and the capabilities of women in general. That realization would drive changes throughout the military that would benefit qualified personnel regardless of gender for generations to come.